copious notes and writing it all down and putting it in my database.
Yeah.
My CRM, my client relationship management. I mean, that was something that was drilled into me. Here's Branson, his wife, went to Arizona State and, she edits videos, all this stuff is in there. And then, maybe I don't remember that because my memory's terrible. But if I'm calling you, hey, Branson, how's your real estate? Oh, how's it going with your wife? Is she still doing it?
Right.
Like I'm reading all of that. And then all of a sudden you think I'm like, a genius because I remember stuff.
Right.
So.
And she's like, and you get that feeling, oh, she really knows me. She
Right.
listened. She understood. And Beyond the Blueprint podcast, we welcome you back for our last episode of season 1. I'm your host, Branson Bowen, and today we are sitting down with Ann Spencer with Cushman & Wakefield. Thanks for joining me, Ann.
Hi, Branson. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, of course. I'm super excited about this episode. Not only is our last of the season.
Save the best for last. Thank you.
Yeah, but I think you got a lot of interesting insight that we can kind of chat about. So I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll kind of get into your origin story and who Ann is.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, I'm Ann Spencer. You just said that. And right now I'm with Cushman & Wakefield. I have been with Cushman & Wakefield for, I think 11 years maybe now. Been in commercial real estate for, I'm going to say I started really young because I look so young, but for like maybe 15, 16 years, something like that. My focus is on healthcare real estate. So it's kind of a super niche market. I mean, as you know, commercial real estate is anything that's not residential. Sure. And so, this is a niche that I have. I've got a team. There's a total of 5 of us that cover the state of Florida. We call ourselves the Florida Healthcare Advisory Practice, but I'm based here in Orlando.
Yeah. So how did you get into commercial brokerage?
Commercial.
Yeah.
It's by accident.
Yeah.
How many people have you met that got into this business on purpose?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
not very many, I'm sure. But definitely by accident. So it's a story. So I was a bartender for a long time, and it was fine. It was fun. I made a lot of money and actually bought my first property as a bartender. I mean, I bought some rental property in downtown Orlando. Yeah. But eventually, as I started getting older, I'm like, I got to go back to school. I can't be a bartender for the rest of my life. And so when I graduated from college, I decided not to leave Orlando. I went to UCF and studied radio and television. So this whole experience is actually super cool being here. But in that particular industry, to do broadcast journalism, you really kind of had to leave Orlando because Orlando is a pretty big market. So folks in that business start off in these tiny little markets in different parts of the country. And I had just met who became my husband, and I was like, I don't really want to leave Orlando. So I got a job doing sales. I remember calling one of my girlfriends saying, what am I going to do? I'm graduating from college. And she goes, well, you like to talk. Why don't you go into sales?
Yeah.
So I got a job in sales selling uniforms.
Okay.
And so, and it was tough, but I learned how to cold call. Like they sent me to this training program where we just focused on like cold calling and, kind of the fundamentals of how to sell. So I did that for a couple of years, did pretty well. Didn't really love it though, because it was uniforms. But I learned a lot. And then, so I had a friend who was a residential realtor. And I remember having lunch with him and I was crying, I don't like doing this uniform thing. And he says, well, why don't you go into commercial real estate? Because he was my realtor. I had bought my properties through him. He goes, why don't you go into, I don't want to be a realtor. I don't want to work weekends. I did that for years as a bartender. And so he said, why don't you go into commercial? I'm like, what's commercial? The mall. I like to shop.
Yeah.
So I can go and sell malls, like I didn't even know what that meant. So anyway, so I was like, okay, that sounds like a cool thing to do. Let me check it out. So I went on to, these job listing things where you can type in the types of jobs you want. So I kept typing in like commercial real estate. And there was this was so long ago, monster.com. Do you remember monster.com?
Yeah.
So a job posting came up for it was a business development broker. That was the title. And it was through a company called Grubb & Ellis. So I applied for the job, but I was still working in my sales job, but I applied for the job. And so I got interviewed by the guy who was running that office. And they loved me because I had no real estate license. I really didn't know anything about real estate, but I knew how to sell. Mm-hmm. And I knew how to make cold calls.
And that's what they were needing at the time.
That's exactly what they wanted.
Yeah.
The job was, being sort of a junior broker or a business development broker for a senior broker. So it was a really good entree for me to be able to get in because I didn't need to necessarily understand the technical side of it. I just needed to learn how to pick up the phone and not be afraid. So they interviewed me and said, okay, great. You know how to sell. do you have a license? Oh, no, I don't. So I took a week's vacation from my uniform sales job and did the crash course. So I got a real estate license.
Yeah.
And then, then I got the license and quit my sales job and uniform job and came to work for Grubb & Ellis. So as a junior broker.
And what did Grubb & Ellis focus on? What markets?
Well, Grubb & Ellis was a national firm. I mean, it was actually global. They were a big firm, and they were a full service commercial real estate brokerage firm, and they had all different what they call food groups. Office, industrial, land, retail. But I had no idea about any of this stuff. I just knew that I needed to cold call, and so the person that they had me work with, the senior broker, was an office tenant rep guy. So I was doing office tenant representation. Do you know what that means? Tenant representation.
Oh yeah,
you do. I know you were a broker by background.
Yeah. So let's talk about your cold calling, right? So like you obviously had some professional sales training with the uniform company.
Yes.
So what did that look like transitioning? Obviously, there's some fundamentals that are very much the same, but what did that look like going into a commercial firm, trying to use the same fundamentals of cold calling and then selling something else?
Sure. Well, we were selling a service. I think that is one thing that's really important, at least for me, what I learned. So the uniforms, I wasn't necessarily selling the uniform like, oh, here, try on this, pink looks good on you. It was a service. I worked for a firm where the folks that had the uniform would they would wash so the company I worked for washed the uniforms. It was like one of those big, mechanics. And so it was more of a service that I was selling.
Sure.
Commercial real estate was the same thing. We weren't actually tenant rep. We were representing folks that lease office space and negotiating leases for them. So what you were selling was myself. Sure. And at the time I was selling my team because I'm walking in going, hey, can I negotiate your multi-million-dollar lease? I started yesterday.
Right.
So, that was a little bit tricky. Like what am I selling?
Sure.
But, I realized we were selling a service. We were selling value. So, the fundamentals of just keeping a database and having benchmarks of how many folks you need to reach out to in order to meet your goal or your quota, that's all the same. You just have to figure out what it is that you were doing, like how many of those calls you needed to make. But so far as what you're selling, if you keep in mind, at least what I learned was, how can I provide value?
Right.
What's the value I can provide to you? And when I started, I really didn't know because I didn't understand the technical side of it. So the value I was selling was my senior partner.
Sure.
Okay, so here's my partner, he's 30, he's got X number of years in the business, I just opened doors.
Sure. And so how did you learn? Because, right, commercial real estate is a very intricate industry, right? And there's a lot of detail that you need to know, especially when you're trying to provide that value up front. So what was that process of you learning, not to go further than just selling that partner and selling the service and what you guys could provide and the different aspects of commercial? What was that process?
How do you jump over? Yeah. What's so scary about our business, and maybe I shouldn't say this, like when you get licensed, you just go and I got a license in a week.
Yeah.
And now I'm like licensed to negotiate your multi-million-dollar transaction. That's
and your license
terrifying.
Consists of all residential.
Yeah.
Right.
All residential. There's no commercial, maybe like a 5-second, discussion on it. So it's kind of scary. So really anybody can just, go get a license and now you can do commercial. But so the, buyer beware, you got to really show that you know what you're doing. And that's where case studies and things like that come into play. So I really had to ride on my, senior partner's coattails for a long time. And it was scary transitioning over. But he brought me in on every deal. Like I would open doors, make appointments, but I was involved in every deal. I ask a lot of questions. Poor guy. He was like, shut up. But I had to because I wanted to understand. I was curious. I saw every document, every LOI, RFP. I remember one thing by way of example. It was a deal that I would brought in I didn't bring in the deal. I would just make the appointments and then we would go together and he would pitch the business. Mm-hmm. And then hopefully they would hire us and he would work the deal. I remember one in the early stages, he said, here's a lease, read it. I'm like, well, what am I looking for? He's just read it. It was an 85-page document. And every lease is different. But sure. I would sat down with a highlighter and I read all this stuff and I'm constantly asked questions. So I guess to sum it up, I feel like it would be really hard to break into this business and do a good job without having someone more senior guide you because there's no book.
Sure.
There might be a book, but I haven't seen it.
Right. And so obviously, I'm a big proponent of asking questions, right? Like I'm, there's the quote of
like you're doing me right now. Asking me.
Right. There's never a bad question, right?
Yeah.
Now, sometimes there might be stupid questions, but
I ask those all the time.
Most of the time, it's better asked than not asked at
Absolutely.
all. Because generally, a lot of people in the room are probably thinking the same thing or wanting to know the same thing.
Yeah.
So, is that something that you've always had? That just natural curiosity?
Yeah, I'm the person that sat in the front row in the classroom and raised my hand all the time. I'm one of those. Yeah. So I'm definitely the one that's asking questions constantly. My mom would always say, "Oh, you're driving me nuts," because she would ask me to do or tell me to do something. Why? Yeah. Not because I'm rebellious, but because I wanted to understand. I'll do it, but I want to know why. Like, what does that mean? How does that work? I was also taking things apart a lot, so I took things apart. But I think curiosity is maybe where you're going. Is like you got to be curious,
right? Do you think that's a trait that in this industry, like it's almost a must-have qualifier to be successful?
That's a really good question. I don't know if it's a must-have, but I think that the people who are successful are curious.
Sure.
So are there ones that are not successful that are not curious? I mean, I doubt it. Look at CEOs. I mean, we're all CEOs of our own company, even if we, work for someone else. I'm sure Elon Musk and Bill Gates are curious guys, right? I mean, you're never going to create something new or solve problems. And that's what we do. We're solving problems, helping people. And,
right.
I think so.
Today's episode is brought to you by Bryce Knuth of Insurance Office of America. As a contractor or real estate owner in Florida, you've likely experienced the impact of rising insurance premiums year after year. With the challenging insurance marketplace, having a specialist who focuses on your industry is critical now more than ever before. If you'd like a second set of eyes on your current insurance program or don't have a relationship with your current broker, please contact Bryce Knuth at 407-697-6944 via call or text, or email bryce.knuth@ioausa.com. Don't let rising insurance costs catch you off guard. Reach out to Bryce today. And so you mentioned you obviously relied on the expertise and the experience of the senior partners. So let's talk a little bit about how important that was for you to continue to grow, right? So you obviously have this hierarchy in the business where you've got senior partners, but then, there's oftentimes where you have mentors and you have people who you look up to and people who you try to emulate certain things about, whether it's their business, their life. Did you have any of those while you were kind of getting through the business? And if so, you don't necessarily have to say names. Who are they? Or, what did you learn from them?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. When you're young in the business, no matter how, now I was a little bit older when I started. So there's a lot of other junior brokers in the office that were all kind of partnered up with seniors. I was probably one of the older ones, but it doesn't matter your chronological age. When you're new, you're still a baby.
Sure.
And so you're a sponge and you're learning everything. And so there's one thing to learn the technical side, which of course is important, but then you also learn behaviors and like ways of doing things. Because there's not like in our business, and I think in anybody's business, there's no right and wrong way. I mean, to some degree there is, like formulas on an Excel spreadsheet. Sure. There's a way to do it. But how to talk to people, what's the right way, how to get business, what's the right way. It's a lot about is your style. So while you can learn the technical side, you're also absorbing that same style of that person. So I think your point is really well taken. It's important to be, well-rounded, like not just have one person that you're following and saying, I'm going to be I don't want to be a mini that person.
Sure.
So for me, I was the only female in the office. I mean, I was the only female broker in the office, junior broker. And so I ended up being like all the guys, and I'm like, okay, now I'm a guy. And so what really kind of helped broaden my perspective, I think, was joining Crew. Commercial real estate women. And I mean, I got to admit, I was pretty intimidated going into the office. I mean, I had been in uniform sales where I was like at mechanics offices and like, very like blue collar kind of environments, which I'm totally comfortable in. And then I take this job in a, high rise office tower. I'm walking in and it's all fancy. I'm like, oh my God, I have to wear pantyhose to the office every day. Like, how does this even work? I was so freaked out. And we'd have these meetings every Monday, sales meetings, and all the guys are in the conference room and me, and everybody's like, oh, I just sold this, $2 million deal. I'm like, what's going on? So yeah, it was pretty terrifying. But I I ended up meeting a woman. She worked for Hunt and Brady. She's still there. And she was a member of crew, very active. And I don't even know how, I can't remember how we met, but she took me to lunch and told me about crew. And I was like, what is this place? I need to learn this organization. And it's all women who are in commercial real estate, all different types. Brokers, people who watch this might know crew, but it's anybody who's in commercial real estate, whether you're a banker or a furniture vendor. And so I joined it, with her urging and assistance. And they meet once a month. And so I met all types of women. And it was just very, very, thank God, because I was able to see a different way of just talking to other people. And, like one example, what do you do when you're cold calling? And part of the cold calling is you're not like cold calling saying, all right, let me represent you. And then they go, okay, yes.
Yeah, right.
You have to build relationships. So I would cold call on law firms and, financial advising services. And, I remember calling on this one senior partner of a law firm, very sophisticated, gentleman, like, can I take you to lunch? Well, how does that work? Do I, this girl, like, can I take you to lunch? Yeah. Now I would have no problem with it. Like, hey, let's go to lunch. But I was so intimidated by it. So I'm asking the girls, like, how do I, the other women, how do I invite, a guy to lunch? Is that weird? Does that look weird? So yeah, all those like little tactical things that you learn.
So what was some like great advice that you learned early on in the commercial brokerage world?
What was some of the great advice I learned? Well, not necessarily about the gender thing, but more just in general. Provide value. So,
and what does that look like? So I want to pause there because this industry is built around providing value,
right?
And it's value in relationships. So what is providing value, especially early in your career?
Right, exactly. Because you're like, I don't know how to provide value. You want to know rental rates in the CBD?
Right.
I don't know. So I really didn't know. So the only thing I could do was ask questions and listen. Mm-hmm. I can listen. I talk a lot, but believe it or not, I can actually listen too. And so that's what I did. When I would cold call, I remember, here's another story. I remember cold calling, like I would actually walk buildings, not just on the phone. I would go to an office building and I would just go around to all the different offices and just basically walk in like, hey, I'm, who I am and I'm who I'm with and what I do. And how's it going with your lease? Is there anything I can do to help? And so I ended up cold calling on a small company, and there was the guy that owned the business, or maybe he was, I don't know, he was a decision maker though. And it was a Friday afternoon, and he's like, sure, come on into my office, I'll talk about my lease. I was like, oh crap. And so I had a notebook. I always have a notebook and a pen. Always have a pen. Like even if you don't know what's going on, just write something down, pretend you're listening. Like, I'm not sure what's happening right now. So I sat down at his desk and he starts telling me about his lease and his landlord issues and issues with like his operating expenses and all these different things. And so I'm like, So tell me. So I just kept asking questions. So what does that mean? Well, can you tell me? And also not being afraid of, I don't know. Right. I didn't pretend that I knew everything.
Right.
Because he could have seen right through me. Hey, I'm new, I've got a senior partner, but I'm here with you now. And I would love to learn about, and tell me about your business.
Sure.
Maybe I don't understand your lease, but tell me about your business and how is business for you? Who are your clients? Right. People love to talk about themselves, yes. Especially business owners and how they make money and how their clients are and how they got successful. If you get them talking, eventually that gives you a moment to sit, to kind of calm down while they're talking to you and get your thoughts together.
Sure.
And then as they're talking and you're listening, you're like, oh, okay. But how is that related to your lease?
Right.
Oh, you mean business is really good. Things are growing. Well, okay, logic. All right. Things are growing. Do you need more space?
Right.
Like, so, just that kind of thing. So providing value at the beginning for me was asking questions and listening.
Right. And I think that the asking questions portion specifically, like you mentioned, when you're going to that business owner and you're understanding their business and how they operate, obviously, people do enjoy talking about themselves and they kind of open up more. But what that's also doing is that's building that relationship. It's building that rapport. And then, eventually, I don't really think, especially in that first meeting or that first cold call, like you said, they're not going to say, yeah, you can represent me tomorrow.
Yeah,
Right. But
right,
you get to
exactly.
know them and know who they are, or know some of their challenges. Maybe you can introduce them to someone
Uh-huh.
that you hear their challenges for. Eventually that builds enough rapport that then they allow you to represent them or allow you to find more space.
And it's a lot of fun. I mean, I got to say, when I first got into the business, I met a girl who sold, I can't even remember. I think it was audiovisual equipment.
Mhm.
And she was a vendor to folks, but she was one of the best connectors. I mean, she was always trying to connect. And it didn't even matter if it had anything to do with business. Like if you and I are chatting and you're like, oh, I just got married and my wife is pregnant. Boom, there's a baby gift
Right.
coming, or even maybe it's not like spending money because, when you're new, you might not have the money to spend, but, um, maybe you mentioned that, your wife is decorating the house and, she's trying to figure out curtain. I don't know. I met a guy the other day who does window treatments. Like, here's his contact.
Right.
It's nothing to do with real estate, but it was just connecting things. And I like doing that anyway because I think it's fun. And so I learned from these gals. I met her through a crew. I learned to do that. So now, again, with my notes, another thing that I learned, copious notes and writing it all down and putting it in my database, my CRM, my client relationship management. I mean, that was something that was drilled into me in my uniform sales job.
Sure.
And then my senior partner was very good about that too. Is keeping a really good database and putting everything in there. Okay, here's Branson. His wife, went to Arizona State and, she edits videos, all this stuff is in there. Yeah. And then, maybe I don't remember that because my memory's terrible. But if I'm calling you, hey, Branson, how's your real estate? Oh, how's it going with your wife? Is she still doing like I'm reading all of that? And then all of a sudden you think I'm like, a genius because I remember stuff.
Right.
So.
And she's like, and you get that feeling, oh, she really knows me. She listened. She understood. And there's a lot of rapport building there as that relationship continues.
And sometimes things will come to me in the middle of the night. Like I'm trying to sleep or I'll read it and I'm like, oh my goodness, I forgot that Bob said, he's looking for something, and then I'll, send him an article or maybe it'll just trigger. But the other thing too is it's very hard to do that with everybody in the universe. So if you're targeting, folks, and you've got your database and you've got all these people in there and you're keeping all these notes, but at some point, that's going to become a lot to juggle in your brain of always thinking about these people. So one thing I was taught was to try to the hot prospects, the people that you really want to keep those relationships, keep it to a manageable number, like 50 to 100. 50 is probably a good number. You can kind of handle 50 people because if you're thinking about them all the time, but 500 becomes a mess.
Right.
So that's one of the things.
So let's jump into, you leave the company that you're at. How do you get to Cushman & Wakefield?
So Grubb & Ellis filed for bankruptcy. That's a good way to exit. Bye. So Grubb & Ellis filed for bankruptcy. So my partner and I ended up splitting. He ended up going to a different firm, and I stayed. So that was pretty scary at the time. I didn't think I could handle it by myself. This was after about 5 years. But it actually worked out. It turns out that a lot of the clients were, they liked me. And so, yeah, I had a lot to learn still, I felt like, but it's relationships, like you said. I mean, the technical stuff you can learn, asking questions. Other folks in the office are always happy to help if I'm like, hey, how do I handle this particular issue? So he left and then I'm on my own. And so I'm like, okay, I'm, doing all right. Things are going okay. And then Grubb filed for bankruptcy. And in the time I had started doing a few healthcare deals too, mostly still tenant rep office, but if a couple of healthcare deals kind of had wormed their way into my life. And then when Grubb filed for bankruptcy, we were, the whole office kind of were looking at different options. And the managing director of our, of Cushman & Wakefield, Larry Ritchie in Florida, he's still around, Larry. He brought on a bunch of us from Grubb. We all came over. A couple of the folks from Grubb used to work for Cushman. So that was kind of for them coming home, and it was new to me, but Larry was great. He brought a bunch of us in, and then Cushman had a national healthcare platform. So I joined that. I'm like, this is something kind of cool. Not a lot of people are doing this. So, it's very much a niche. Let me just see if this might be something I'm interested in. So I joined that group nationally. Nobody in Orlando or even Florida, I don't think, for that matter, that were doing healthcare with Cushman. But the national team was very supportive and helpful. And I learned a lot about healthcare with those guys. I spent a lot of time on conference calls with them. So that's kind of how I started establishing my niche. I'm like, all right. So now I'm kind of starting over a little bit, but I also know how to build a database and how to form relationships. I have a lot more confidence now. And so that's what I did.
So you had that foundation, and then you were able
to
make that transition a little bit more seamlessly.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So we're going to get into Cushman Wakefield and then your experience after that in the next episode. So we'll wrap this one up. Beyond the Blueprint. Make sure you join us for episode 2 with Ann Spencer as we talk about healthcare real estate, some of the things she learned as she's building a team, and her entrepreneurial journey. Stay tuned for next time. See ya.